The first time I died, a machine took me. A dumb, badly kept machine on a factory floor. The kind I'd never have allowed within a mile of any shop of mine. The kind that gets neglected until neglect is just an accident waiting for a body to find it. It's seized. That's the word, the exact word, and you'll see in a moment why it's the word that runs through this whole story like a crack through a casting. It's seized, jammed solid in a half-second the way a starved bearing does, and it caught me before I could pull clear. And that was that. 50 years old, one of the finest engineers who ever lived, killed running someone else's junk for an hourly wage in a gray building, by a machine I could have kept alive in my sleep if anyone had ever let me near it as anything but a pair of hands. And the last thing in my mind before the dark was that word, seized, and then a different machine, a beautiful one, the racing robot I'd built with my own 2 hands, and the day I made it fail on purpose, drove it to lose in front of the whole world, because the man I had idolized my entire life leaned down and told me that the sponsor's money mattered more than the truth. Here is the cruelty of it, the thing I carried out of that dark and across into a second life. I had a gift, and I had a faith, and they were the same thing. The gift was engineering, the real kind, the rare kind. I could build a machine that performed, not just on a bench in still air but out in the merciless real, under load, under heat, under the strain of a race, where a machine either holds together or comes apart, and there is no arguing with which. I understood machines the way some people understand music, could feel where a design would fail before it failed, could coax reliability out of moving parts the way you'd coax a frightened animal to trust you. And the faith was in the work itself. Because engineering, I believed, was the one honest thing in a crooked world. A machine cannot lie. You cannot charm a bearing into not seizing, or by a casting that won't crack, or sweet-talk a motor into making power it doesn't have. You push a machine hard enough and it tells you the truth about itself, every time, and that truth doesn't care about your money or your name or your sponsor. It cares only whether you built it right. I loved that. I built my whole life, and my whole self on that. And I threw away the faith, and let the gift go to rot, because the genius I had worshipped since I was a girl, the hero whose work made me fall in love with machines in the first place, asked me to make my own true machine fail, to betray the one honest thing I believed in, so that money could win. And I did it, and the faith died, and the gift went cold, and 22 years later a neglected machine seized and killed the woman who could have built machines that never would have. And then I opened my eyes, and my robot wasn't a memory I was dying with, it was real, whole, gleaming in the pit in front of me, my tools laid out, my hands young and quick again, and I was 28, in the final. The race still ahead, the machine still true. Let me tell you who I was, because you can't understand the size of what I tanked unless you understand what the work meant to me and where the faith came from. I came up loving machines before I loved anything, a kid who took apart everything in the house to see how it worked and mostly got it back together, and somewhere in there I discovered the heroes of the field, the great engineers, the legends, the ones whose designs were so elegant they made you ache. And one of them, above all of them, was Elias Maddox. I read everything he wrote. I studied his machines the way other kids studied scripture. His genius was the reason I chose this life. The reason I believed engineering was a noble thing, a true thing, a thing worth giving your one life to, because here was a man who built machines of such integrity that they seemed like arguments for a better world, proof that if you were just honest enough and good enough and rigorous enough, you could make something that told nothing but the truth. I wanted to be that. I wanted to build like that. And I earned my way, not through any door he opened, but through my own work, through machines I built that got noticed, onto his team, the team he led, the chance to stand in the same shop as the man who'd shaped my whole soul. Remember the faith. Remember the worship. Remember that I came to him already loving him, through my own merit, because the integrity of the work was the most beautiful thing I'd ever believed in. It's the heart of everything I tanked, and everything I came back to run. I want to be specific about that faith, because it's the whole of who I was before the world got its hands on me, and it's a thing people who've never had it don't understand. I didn't love engineering the way you love a hobby. I loved it the way some people love a religion, because it answered the question every kid from a crooked, disappointing world is secretly asking, which is anything actually fair? And the answer engineering gave me was yes. Here, in this one place, yes. A machine doesn't care who your parents are or how much money is in the room or whether anyone likes you. It cares only whether you understood the truth of it well enough to build it right. And if you did, it rewards you, and if you didn't, it punishes you. And it does both without favor or malice. The same for everyone forever. I found that out the first time I built something that ran when it should have run, and I never got over it. In a world where I'd already learned that people lie and systems are rigged, a machine was the one honest judge I'd ever met. It could not be bribed. It could not be charmed. It told the truth under load, whether you wanted to hear it or not. And I decided somewhere around the age of 12 that I would give my whole life to that, to the one honest thing, and that the great engineers, the Maddoxes, were a kind of priesthood of the truth, people who'd given their lives to building things that didn't lie. That's why it cut where it cut. Understand that, and you understand everything. The faith wasn't a career, and it wasn't a hobby. It was the load-bearing belief of my entire life, the answer to whether anything was fair, and the heroes were its evidence. To have one of them, the greatest one, the one I'd built my soul on, lean down and ask me to make a true thing lie was not just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of the only honest thing I'd ever found, by the very person I'd trusted to keep it. And I carried a thing, always a small steel gear, machined by my own hands, from the first real machine I ever built that ran true. Not a charm. I didn't believe in charms, I believed in tolerances. But a token, a touchstone, a little perfect piece of evidence that I had once taken raw stock and made it into something that turned exactly the way it should. I kept it in my pocket on every race day. It meant I build true things. It meant the work is honest, and so am I. Remember the gear. Remember the first true thing I ever made. They matter at the end. The run was the soul of it. And I mean the race specifically, the moment a machine you built leaves the pit and has to prove itself out there under real strain, lap after lap, where every shortcut you took and every truth you told gets exposed by the simple fact of pushing the thing as hard as it will go. That's the purest test there is, and it's why I loved racing robots above all the rest of engineering, because a bench test is polite, but a race is brutal and honest, and a machine that looks perfect standing still will tell you the truth the instant you push it to its limit. It runs true or it seizes. There is no in-between and no appeal and no sponsor on earth who can reach onto the track and keep a bad machine from coming apart when it's finally, genuinely pushed. I lived for that. The green flag, the strain coming on, the moment of truth stretched out over laps instead of crammed into one, because in that moment my machine and I were telling the truth together in public and nobody's money could change the verdict. Remember the run. Remember the strain, the lap. The moment a machine tells the truth. They're where this whole story is raced, and they're what I betrayed, and they're what I came back to run. And then there was Maddox up close, and I learned that even the heroes you build your soul around will sell the truth if the price is right. I need you to understand what it does to a person to discover that, because it's not the wound of a parent or a coach or a backer. It's the wound of an idol, and it cuts in a place those others can't reach. Elias Maddox, up close, was everything I dreamed, and for a while it was the best year of my life, working in the shadow of the genius who'd made me. But Maddox, I would learn, ran on more than genius. He ran on money, the team's money, which came, all of it, from a single enormous corporate sponsor, a company called Corvex, and Corvex did not sponsor our team out of love for the truth. Corvex had its own flagship team, its showpiece, the machine it had poured its marketing budget into, driven by its golden boy, a polished, well-funded engineer named Kane. And what Corvex wanted, what it paid for, was for its flagship to win, because a flagship that wins sells the brand, and a flagship that loses to some better-built underdog is an embarrassment the marketing department cannot abide. And Maddox, the genius, the legend, the man whose integrity I'd worshipped, Maddox was, underneath it all, a man who needed Corvex's money to keep his program and his name and his lifestyle alive, and who had quietly learned over the years to give the sponsor what it paid for. That dependence, that rod at the center of the man I idolized, was the foundation everything stood on, and it was the exact thing he used to make me tank. Because that year, I had built something. Understand, I had built a machine. Not a showpiece, not a budget poured into carbon fiber, but a true thing, a robot I'd engineered for one purpose, to run honest and hold together and tell the truth under the worst strain a race could throw at it, and it was better than Kane's flagship. Not richer. Better. Anyone who knew machines could see it. And in the final, my true underdog machine was going to push Kane's expensive showpiece harder than it had ever been pushed, and a machine push that hard tells the truth. And the truth was that Corvex's flagship had never been built to survive a real race. It had been built to win the ones it was allowed to win. Remember Kane. He's not the architect. He was a decent enough engineer riding a budget he didn't fully understand was the only reason he won, who'd never once had to find out, against a real machine pushed to a real limit, what his showpiece was actually made of. He was the sponsor's golden boy, and the reason I was told to tank. There were two people who saw me clear, the way Maddox had stopped seeing anything but the money. The first was Gus, an old machinist on the team, a grizzled veteran with steel shavings in the creases of his hands, a man who'd been building true machines since before Maddox was famous and had never once in his life signed his name to a lie. Gus was the genuine article, the thing I'd thought Maddox was. Quiet integrity, no genius for self-promotion, just a lifetime of honest work. And the tragedy was that I'd spent my worship on the wrong man and only learned to tell the difference too late. Remember Gus? He saved my second life with one sentence. And the second was Danny, my friend, a fellow engineer on the team, sharp and loyal and as in love with the honest work as I was, who had my back in a shop slowly being bent toward the sponsor's wishes, and whom I lost in my first life and came back for in my second. Now I have to tell you about the final, because it's the center of everything. It was the championship, the title race of the whole league, the one that mattered, the one whose winner was crowned the best machine and the best engineer in the sport with everything that followed, the career, the recognition, the future in a field I'd given my soul to. And that year my underdog had earned its way to the front, and the final came down to a race I could win, that I should win, that my machine was built to win against Corvex's flagship. For me it was not just a title. It was the vindication of my entire faith. Proof, in public, on the track, that a true machine honestly built beats a showpiece bought with money, that the integrity of the work is real and not a children's story, that the thing I'd believed since I was a girl studying Maddox's designs was actually true. It was everything. And it was, of course, exactly the thing Corvex could not allow and Maddox could not afford to let happen. The night before the final, in my first life, Maddox called me into his office for the conversation he'd been building toward. He sat me down, and he used the warm voice, the mentor's voice, the voice of the genius I'd worshipped, and he said, "Romy, I need to talk to you about tomorrow, engineer to engineer, because I respect you too much to dress it up." And my whole worshipping heart leaned in. Your machine is better than Kane's. You know it, I know it, anyone with eyes knows it. And in a perfect world, the better machine wins, and that's the end of it. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in one where Corvex's money is the only reason this team exists, the reason you have a shop, a budget, a paycheck, a career, the reason any of us get to build it all. And Corvex needs its flagship to win tomorrow. They've made that very clear. If Kane loses to our underdog, they pull their sponsorship, and this whole team, your team, the place you do your work, is finished, all of us out. So here's what I'm asking, as the man who's been where you are and learned what you're about to learn. And here he did the thing, the soft pivot, the worship turned into a blade. Tank it tomorrow. Don't run your machine at its limit. Hold it back, drop it down the order, find a reason to lose, and let Kane take the title. Do it for the team. Do it for all our jobs. And understand that this is just how the real world works. The title doesn't matter half as much as the funding, and the sooner you learn that, the longer you'll last in this sport. And then the ask, the one that is the title of my whole story, delivered with the world-weary certainty of a man who'd long ago sold the truth and called it maturity. Tank the robotics final, so my sponsor's team wins. My sponsor. I want you to hear those two words, because they were the whole knife. I sat there, a girl who had built her entire soul on this man's integrity, and the genius I had worshipped looked at me and said my sponsor, and in those two words the whole idol came down. He wasn't the keeper of the truth. He was the sponsor's man. The integrity I'd given my life to, the noble, honest thing I believed engineering to be, because Elias Maddox had seemed to embody it. It was a story I'd told myself about a man who, underneath, was just another person who'd learned to give the money what it paid for and call the surrender wisdom. And the deeper cruelty, the one I'd understand fully only when I was grown and dead and reborn, was the specific shape of what he asked. He didn't ask me to lose a race. He asked me to make my own true machine fail, to take the one honest thing I believed in, the machine I'd built to tell the truth under strain, and force it to lie, to hold it back, to make it underperform, to betray the integrity of the work itself with my own hands on the controls. He was asking me to prove, in public, that the better machine doesn't win, that money beats the truth, that the faith I'd built my life on was a lie, and to be the one who proved it. And the promise folded inside it, do it for all our jobs, was the oldest sellout's lie there is, the one that dresses cowardice as responsibility, because a man who'll make you betray the truth to save your paycheck has just taught you that your paycheck is worth more than your soul, and that is a lesson that does not stop at one race. And Maddox had found the one lever a worshipper has no defense against, the worship itself, the desperate need for my hero to be right, the unbearable cost of believing he was wrong, and he used it to ask me to make my true machine fail. And I did it. God forgive the engineer I was, but understand her, I did it. The next day, in the final, in front of the cameras and the crowd and the whole sport, I tanked it. Not crudely. Maddox wanted it to look real, and I knew my machine well enough to make it convincing. I'd attuned it just enough, ran it just off its limit, drove it to hold station instead of pushing, let it look like an underdog that ran out of pace instead of an underdog deliberately strangling itself. I made my own true machine lie. And Kane's flagship, never genuinely pushed, cruised home and took the title, and Corvex got what it paid for, and Maddox kept his money, and I, the better engineer, with the better machine, the one who should have won, drove my own truth into the ground on purpose. And the worst part, the part that followed me into 22 gray years, is that I knew, in every lap I held back, that I was killing something, that I was taking the one honest thing I believed in and making it lie, proving the money right and the work of fool's faith, and teaching myself the lesson that would rot my whole life, that integrity is a children's story, that the truth doesn't win, that the smart and grown-up thing is to give the money what it wants and stop believing in anything. And Kane lifted the trophy, and Maddox clapped his sponsor's golden boy on the back, and I drove my dishonest machine back to the pit with the faith of my whole life cracked straight through. And the team did not survive anyway. Of course it didn't. That's the part that finished me. Corvex got its win, and then within a couple of seasons Corvex moved its money somewhere shinier, the way the money always does, and Maddox's program withered, and the jobs we'd all betrayed the truth to save evaporated regardless, because they were never really ours to save, they were Corvex's to spend. The promise had been a lie, the way they always are. And the door I'd tanked, the title, the proof, the career, the vindication of my faith, closed for good, because an engineer who throws a championship final, even quietly, even convincingly, is known in a small sport, whispered about, never quite trusted with a real shot again. The future I'd given my soul to went dark with the faith. There was no other door, and the rot did not stay contained to one race. That's the thing about being taught, by the very person whose integrity you'd built your life on, that integrity is a lie. It doesn't stay one tanked final. It dissolves the foundation, and everything you are dissolves with it. I had believed that the work was honest and the truth wins, and a life given to building true things is a life well spent. And Maddox had taken all of it, in one office, in one ask, and replaced it with the acid knowledge that even the best of us sells the truth when the price is right, that nothing is honest, that believing in the integrity of anything just marks you as a child who hasn't learned how the world works. I want to stay in that rot a moment, because the way it spread is the part nobody warns you about, the part that's worse than one lost championship. A wound to your circumstances stays in your circumstances. A wound to your faith gets into the water supply of your whole self, and poisons things that have nothing to do with where it started. Because once you've watched your highest hero sell the truth and call it wisdom, and once you've made your own true thing lie at his word, you cannot unknow what you learned, and what you learned was that integrity is for suckers. And that lesson doesn't stay at the track. It follows you into every room. Why build something true when the truth doesn't win? Why care about doing the work straight when even the great ones cut the deal? Why believe in anything, a person, a project, a principle, when the most honest man you ever knew of turned out to be the sponsor's errand boy underneath? I became cynical the way disappointed idealists become cynical, which is the most complete and corrosive cynicism there is, because it isn't lazy or borrowed. It's built on the rubble of something you genuinely, wholly loved, and it has all the energy of that love turned inside out. I stopped building true things because the faith that powered the building was dead, and a gift without a faith behind it is just a skill you slowly stop using. I trusted nothing and no one. I told myself this was maturity, the very word Maddox used, and I repeated his sermon to myself in my own voice for 22 years. This is how the real world works. The title doesn't matter, grow up, until I'd talked myself out of every honest thing I'd ever believed. And I drifted, the way the faithless drift, down and down, out of real engineering and into gray jobs that asked nothing of the gift, because the gift had nothing behind it anymore, until I landed on a factory floor, running someone else's neglected machines for an hourly wage, the engineer, who could have built the best machines in the world, reduced to a pair of hands tending junk she wasn't allowed to fix and wasn't paid to care about. I watched those machines decay because nobody whose job it was cared, and I didn't fix them either because I'd stopped believing that caring about a machine or anything was worth the trouble, and that, in the end, is what killed me. At 50, one of those neglected machines did the thing neglected machines do. It seized, jammed solid in a half-second because no one had cared for it, mine included, and it caught me before I could pull clear. The engineer who'd once believed that a machine cared for properly would never seize, killed by a seize she'd stopped caring enough to prevent. And the last thing in my mind was that word, seized, and a beautiful true machine I made lie on purpose, the day my hero came down and took my faith with him. And then I opened my eyes, and my robot was real and whole and gleaming in the pit, my tools laid out, my hands young and quick, and I was 28, in the final. The race still ahead, the machine still true. I did not cry, and I'll be straight with you about that, because the soft version has me weeping over my machine, and the real version is harder and stranger. What moved through me, crouched there in the pit with my true machine in front of me, was the clean, total clarity of an engineer who has made her own truth lie, betrayed the one honest thing she believed in, and just been handed, against every law of God and physics, the chance to run it true. The strangeness of it nearly buckled me, that first moment, because nobody tells you what it is to be your grown self and your young self at once, in the same body, in the pit where it all went wrong. I looked at my hands, and they were a 28-year-old's hands, quick and unscarred, not yet the hands of a woman who'd spent 2 decades tending junk she'd stopped caring about. I looked at my machine, and it was whole and honest, every tolerance true, the thing I'd strangle on purpose in a few hours' time in another life, sitting there alive, and waiting to tell the truth. I could see Maddox across the pit with a worshipful distance still in my chest, where the disillusion hadn't happened yet, and Kane's flagship gleaming under its sponsor's paint, and I knew the whole future. The tank, the broken faith, the acid, the gray decades, the seas that would kill me. I knew all of it, carried all of it, in a body that hadn't lived a day of it. For one strange beat, I half expected, every time I blinked, to wake back on the factory floor with the machine jamming and the dark coming up. But the gear was real in my pocket, and the machine was real under my hands, and when I checked the tune it was perfect, honest, ready, and slowly the strangeness settled into the one hard certainty underneath, that this was not a dream and not a mercy I'd earned, just a window thrown open one more time, in the pit, the machine still true, and that I was not going to spend it dazed. I had a race to run true. More than that, I had a faith to take back out of the rubble I'd let it become, and a machine to run instead of strangle, and one chance to prove on the track that the truth wins, where I'd proven the opposite. And underneath the clarity lower down was something I'd thought was dead, the faith. Because I put my hand on my machine, and I could feel it again, the integrity of it, the truth built into every tolerance, and the faith came flooding back up through my hands after 22 years of acid and ash. I nearly fired it up right there just to hear it run clean, because I'd spent a whole gray life believing the truth didn't win and integrity was a children's story, and now I was 28 and a true machine was under my hands again, ready to prove on the track that the faith was real after all. Even if the title had been gone forever, I think I'd have wept just for that, for the machine, for the faith, for the honest thing I'd thought I'd killed. The revenge, whatever it became, was always going to run second to that. The first thing was that I had my faith back. Everything else came from refusing, this time, to make it lie. The hours before the final were strange and vivid, and the strangest part was all of them being alive and unwritten again. Maddox, worshipped and rotten and not yet exposed. Kane, polished and propped up and not yet seized. Corvex's people in their branded jackets. Gus with steel in the creases of his hands. Danny, who'd had my back, whom I'd lost in another life. I moved through that pit the way an engineer walks a failed design, finding every place the first build went wrong. I found Gus first at the bench. Not for help with the machine, for something closer to a true compass, after a lifetime pointed at a false one. In my first life after I tanked it, Gus had known. A machinist that good, who'd helped me build that robot bolt by bolt and knew exactly what it could do, would have watched me run it off its limit and known. A machine that true doesn't just run out of pace, not in the hands of the engineer who built it. And something in old Gus had gone quiet and grieved because he'd spent 50 honest years on the belief that the work was worth doing straight, and he'd watched a kid he believed in make her own truth lie, and he could never prove it or undo it. So in my second life, I went to him, and I said, plain, they want me to tank it. To make my own machine lose. Maddox himself, for the sponsor. And Gus looked up from the bench with those steady old eyes, the eyes of a man who'd never once signed his name to a lie, and he was quiet a moment, and then he said the thing I carried into every machine I built for the rest of 2 lives. Listen to me, because I've only got the one thing to say, and it's the only thing I've ever known for sure. A machine tells the truth. That's the whole of it, and it's the best thing in this rotten world, because it's the one truth nobody's money can buy off. You can dress up a bad machine, you can fund it and paint it and put a golden boy in the seat, and it'll win the races nobody pushes it in. But you push it, really push it, the way only a better machine can push it, and it tells the truth about itself, every time, and the truth comes out as a seize or a crack or a part on the track, and there's not a sponsor alive who can stop it. So you run yours, kid. You run it at the limit, and you make them push their showpiece to keep up, and you let the race tell the truth. Don't you dare make a true thing lie to save a coward his paycheck. The race doesn't care whose sponsor anybody is. It only cares who built it right. He didn't know he was the genuine article I'd spent my worship on the wrong man instead of finding. He didn't know he was describing the shape of my death and my resurrection. I never told him, but I've carried it into every build since. A machine tells the truth when you push it. The race doesn't care whose sponsor you are, so run yours at the limit and make them push their showpiece until it tells the truth. I did not confront Maddox that day, and people always ask why I didn't expose him the second I woke up knowing what he was. The answer runs underneath this whole story, because a confrontation was a scene, and a scene was a thing Maddox could win, easily, because he held the legend and the team and the story and a young engineer's whole future in a small sport. He was the great Elias Maddox, fluent in the language of the wise veteran teaching an idealistic girl how the real world works, and any accusation I made would be turned, instantly, into proof that I was naive, ungrateful, a hothead who didn't understand the realities of the business, and the sport would believe him, because he was the legend and I was nobody, and believing him cost them nothing, and believing me cost them their comfortable picture of a great man. The one move he had no answer to was an engineer who simply, quietly, was no longer available to make her machine lie. So, I gave him nothing to push against. I was respectful, I was the worshipping protege he expected, and inside I was a sealed design he couldn't read, and I let him walk toward the final certain that the girl he'd ordered to tank it had quietly, permanently, decided to run. And I watched Kane because Kane was the golden boy at the center of it, and I needed to see him clear with my second life eyes. And here's what I saw. An engineer who had no idea what he was. Kane genuinely believed his flagship was the best machine because it had always won, and it had always won because Corvex's money had bought it the best of everything, and because, when it came down to it, the better machines had been told to tank, all without Kane ever knowing. He wasn't cruel. He was, in his polished way, perfectly decent. He was just a man who had never once had to find out, against a real machine pushed to a real limit, what his showpiece was actually built to survive, because the sport had been arranged so he'd never have to. Remember that. It's why his C's wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was the first honest measurement of his whole career, the first time his machine was genuinely pushed and made to tell the truth. And an engineer can survive that, even be made by it, the way I'd never been let to. Kane wasn't the architect. He was the golden boy the architects propped up, and the reason I was told to make my truth lie. And there was Danny. I have to tell you about Danny because in my first life I lost her along with everything else, and some of what I came back for was her. Danny was my friend, a fellow engineer on the team, as in love with the honest work as I was, a woman who'd argue with you for an hour about a tolerance because she cared, who lit up at a clean solution, who'd stayed on a team slowly bending toward the sponsor's wishes because she believed, like me, that the work was worth doing straight. In my first life, after I tanked it, I'd pulled away from Danny the way you pull away from everyone when you've done a thing you're ashamed of because a fellow engineer sees a machine run, and Danny had built half that robot beside me and knew exactly what it could do, and when I ran it off its limit she'd have known. A machine that true doesn't just run out of pace. And I couldn't stand to be known by the one person who'd believed in the work with me. So I lost her. So in my second life I found her, in the pit before the final, and she did the thing she always did. Looked up from a fastener and said, "We're running it flat out, right? Tell me we're letting it off the leash." I have wanted to watch that showpiece try to keep up with our machine for the entire season. And in my first life, I'd given her some flat non-answer, already half decided to tank. This time I looked at her and said, "Flat out, Danny. Every lap, we make them chase." And Danny grinned the grin of an engineer who's about to watch the truth come out and said, "Good. Because everybody in this pit who actually knows machines knows it's ours. The only people pretending it's Kane's are the ones signing the checks. Let's go make it tell the truth." Out of the mouth of a fellow believer in the honest work, the whole truth, plainly. I kept Danny this time. She was at my bench, arguing about tolerances for the whole of a life that actually had people in it. The day of the final, before the race, Maddox found me one last time, exactly as I knew he would, with the ask he'd built toward. He caught me in the pit, hand on my shoulder, the hand of the genius I'd worshipped, and he said low, "Remember our conversation, Romy. Remember what's riding on this. All of us, the whole team. Be smart today. Hold it back, let Kane have it, do the grown-up thing. And you'll have a long career in this sport. You have my word." I looked at him, this man whose integrity I'd built my whole soul on, and I felt the weight of 2 lives hang on what I said next. And I said, level and clear as a machine that's been built right, "No, Elias. I'm running mine today. At the limit, every lap. If Kane's machine can beat mine when I'm pushing it for everything it's got, then he's the champion, and I'll shake his hand and mean it. But I'm not strangling my own true machine, making it lie, to save a showpiece from being pushed hard enough to tell the truth." The change that came over his face is a thing I'll remember as long as I can true a wheel. He'd never heard it, not from his worshipping protege, not without a seam he could widen back into the old reverent yes. And the warmth fell off him, and what was underneath was tired and cold and corrupt. After everything I've taught you? You think you're the first idealist who thought the truth would save them? Grow up. I can make sure you never get a competitive seat in the sport again. One word to the right people and you're a known quantity, a liability, the girl who can't be relied on. Done. The sport runs on sponsors, and the sponsors will be told what you are. You'll be nothing without people like me, and you're about to throw it away to make a point nobody will remember. Don't be a stupid, naive girl. Tank it. And there it was, at last, the thing under the worship all along. Not a keeper of the truth, not a hero, just a frightened, corrupt man who'd sold his integrity so long ago he'd forgotten it was ever worth anything and expected everyone else to make the same sale. In my first life, that threat, "You'll be nothing without people like me," would have unmade me, because a worshipper believes her hero holds the keys to everything. But I wasn't only that worshipper anymore. I'd already been nothing. I'd died nothing, running junk on a factory floor with my faith 22 years dead. So I said, level and unafraid. Then make me nothing. But I'm running mine true. If Kane's machine is good enough to win, It'll do it against mine pushed to the limit. If it can only win when I make mine lie, then it was never the better machine, and you've always known it, and that's the whole reason you're standing in my pit threatening me instead of trusting your sponsor's golden boy to win on his own. A machine tells the truth when you push it, Elias. The race doesn't care whose sponsor anybody is. Watch what the truth looks like. And I turned to my machine and I made my final checks and I got ready to run it at the limit. Here's the part Maddox never understood, or had taught himself to forget, the mechanism under the whole thing, and I'll lay it out plain because it's the engine of everything. A race is the most honest test there is, because a machine that's never genuinely pushed will run forever looking perfect, and only a real competitor pushing it to its true limit forces it to tell the truth about how it was actually built. In my first life, by tanking, I didn't beat my own machine with bad luck. I simply never pushed Kane's. I held mine back, ran off the limit, let the flagship cruise, and a flagship that never has to run flat out never has to show what it's made of. So Kane's showpiece, never truly pushed, sailed home looking like a champion, because the one machine that could have forced it to its limit had been told to lie. My tanking was the entire margin. The day I ran mine for real, the margin came back. I put my true machine on the limit, and I made Kane's flagship chase it, made it run flat out, lap after lap, at a pace it had never once in its pampered life been forced to sustain, and a machine built with money instead of integrity, pushed for the first time to its genuine limit, did the only thing such a machine can do. It told the truth. On the third lap, with my machine ahead and the flagship straining to hold my pace, a part of Kane's showpiece that had never been built to take that load gave way, and the machine seized, jammed solid, came to a stop in a cloud of its own failure, right there on the third lap, in front of everyone. It didn't seize because I did anything to it. It seized because I stopped doing the one thing that had ever protected it. I stopped strangling my own machine and made the flagship run hard enough for once to tell the truth. And the truth was a seize on lap 3. I'll tell you about that race, because in my first life I made my machine lie through it, and running it true in my second was a resurrection at racing speed. The flag dropped, and I put my machine on the limit and left it there, let it run the way I'd built it to run, honest and hard and holding together under a strain that would have shaken a lesser machine apart. And it was the most alive I'd been in 2 lifetimes, because my true thing was finally telling the truth in public the way I'd made it to. And Kane's flagship came after me because it had to, because I wasn't going to drift back this time and let it cruise. It had to actually race, actually push, actually run flat out to stay with a machine that was better than it. And I could see it straining, see it doing the thing it had never had to do, running at a limit its budget had hidden but never actually raised. And on the first lap it held, and on the second lap it held, but I could see it working too hard, the showpiece running past its honest design to chase a true machine. And that, more than anything, was the moment I knew, because a machine that's working that hard to keep up is a machine living on borrowed time, spending reliability it doesn't have to buy a pace it was never built to sustain. And on the third lap, it gave. A part let go, the kind of part that holds forever until the one day you genuinely push it, and the flagship seized, jammed solid, and slewed to a stop, its expensive paint gleaming over a machine that had finally been made to tell the truth about how it was built. And I ran on, true and clean, my honest machine holding together exactly as I'd engineered it to, lap after lap, all the way to the line, and I won. I won the way I'd dreamed of winning since I was a girl reading Maddox's designs. The better machine, honestly built, beating the bought one. In public, on the track, the faith of my whole life proven true in the only court that can't be bought. And then Maddox broke. And beside him, Corvex's people in their branded jackets. It happened as the flagship seized, as my win became undeniable, as the whole sport understood that the underdog had run true, and the sponsor's showpiece had been pushed until it failed. And I watched the realization move across Maddox's face in stages. First the disbelief, the certainty I'd tank it, that surely the worshipping girl would do, as the legend said. Then the dawning horror as I held the limit and made the flagship chase, as he understood I'd refused, that I was running mine true. Then, as Kane's machine seized on the third lap, the full collapse, the understanding that there was nothing to be done, that you cannot unseize a machine or unrun a true race, that Corvex's flagship had just been exposed. in front of everyone, as a bought showpiece that couldn't survive being genuinely pushed, and that the money was about to walk and his whole rotten arrangement with it. And then his face did the thing I'd waited 2 lifetimes to see. It cracked, the legend and the wisdom and the great man act all falling away, because he just understood that Kane's whole career, the flagship's whole unbeaten record, had only ever existed in the space my tanking made, and the one time I refused to make my truth lie, the showpiece seized on lap 3. He made a sound, not loud, the small, stunned, terrible sound of a man discovering that there was, after all, one thing the sponsor's money couldn't buy, and one truth his authority couldn't strangle, a machine genuinely pushed, and that the worshipper he'd told to tank it had used it instead to tell the truth in front of the whole world. I knew that face, though I'd never worn it in public the way he was wearing it now. I'd worn its slow inside-out version. Across 22 cynical years, the long, quiet collapse of a person who'd sold the truth and had to live in the hollow where it used to be. Maddox was having that whole collapse in one public minute. He had staked everything on a single certainty, that the worshipping girl would do as her hero said, because she could not bear to believe he was wrong. And the certainty had just failed, on the track, in front of the cameras and the sport and the sponsor he'd sold his soul to please. And there was nothing underneath it. No real superiority in Kane's machine. No legend that survived the seas. No money that could reach onto the track and unfail a showpiece pushed past its honest limit. Only the exposed fact of a great man who'd become the sponsor's errand boy, caught in the one place it couldn't be smoothed over. A machine, genuinely pushed, telling the truth. And the sport saw it. That was the part he could never legend his way out of. People had spent years believing Elias Maddox stood for the integrity of the work. Now they'd watched his sponsor's flagship seize the moment a true machine forced it to actually race, with his own protege at the controls of the machine that did it. And a sport does its own quiet arithmetic about a great man like that, and the answer is not the kind that keeps a legend intact. The great Maddox took his first real crack in that pit, and it was the crack of a seized machine and a lap 3 failure saying the truth had been his to keep all along, and he'd sold it. I did not go to him. I want that on the record, because it's the heart of who I'd become. I didn't walk over and explain that the flagship had seized by the exact measure of the truth I'd refused, this time, to strangle. I stood by my honest machine with Gus's words warm in my chest, and I let Maddox break, because his breaking was not a thing I had to fix. The only thing I'd done was run my own machine true and decline for one race, to make it lie so a showpiece wouldn't have to be pushed hard enough to fail. The rest he'd done himself, years before, the day he first decided the sponsor's money was worth more than the truth, and every day after that he kept making the sale. And then something happened that told me everything about what the sport had built around Kane. Kane came to me. Not gracious, not at first. He came with the hollow, stunned look of an engineer whose machine had just failed in a way he didn't understand, and he said, half to himself, staring back at his seized flagship, "It's never done that. It's never been pushed like that." I didn't know it would. And he stopped, and I watched him do the arithmetic he'd never had to do, watched something move behind his eyes, the first crack of an awareness that maybe the wins had never been quite what he thought, that maybe his machine had never actually been the best, only the best funded and the least genuinely tested, that maybe he'd been winning races the better machines had been told to lose. He wasn't cruel about it. He was just an engineer meeting the true measure of his own work for the first time, which is a hard thing to meet, and harder still to suspect that the sponsor who funded you arranged for you never to meet it sooner. "Yours just held," he said finally, almost wondering, looking at my machine still ticking clean in the pit, and there was something under it that was nearly relief, the relief of an engineer who spent his career uneasy about a thing he could name finally seeing it named. I heard he got better after that, once Corvex's money and Corvex's protection came off, got humble, started building machines that could actually take a push, became a real engineer instead of a funded one. The golden boy Corvex held up as the reason to make me tank turned out to be another person the money had failed, just more comfortably, than it failed me. Kane wasn't the architect. He was the showpiece, seized on lap 3. Maddox came to find me a while later, not to apologize, because Maddox didn't have it in him anymore. That part of him had been sold off years ago, but lost and cold, and genuinely uncomprehending, and his not understanding showed me the exact shape of the rot that had nearly consumed me. So I told him, not the rebirth, not the gray years, not the machine that seized and killed me, the mechanism. I said, you are the reason I believed in any of this, the integrity of the work, the honesty of the machine, the idea that the truth wins. I built my whole soul on you. And the first time your sponsor's money was on the line, you told me to make my own true machine lie, to strangle it, to prove in public that the better machine doesn't win. And you called it growing up. But Kane's flagship was never the better machine. The only reason it ever won was that I tanked. My strangling was the whole margin. The one time I ran mine true and made his actually get pushed, it seized on lap 3, because that's exactly what it was built to do under a real strain. And you've always known it. You're the one who told me my machine was better the night you told me to tank. I let it sit. And here's what you forgot. What you sold off so long ago you can't even remember it was worth anything. A machine tells the truth when you push it. The race doesn't care whose sponsor anybody is, or whose career needs saving, or how grown up you've taught yourself to be about giving the money what it wants. You push a machine to its real limit and it tells the truth about how it was built, every single time, and there is nothing, not your money, not your legend, not your wisdom, that can keep a bought showpiece from seizing when it's finally, genuinely pushed. I believed in you. It turns out I just believed in the work, and you were the one who taught me to, before you forgot it yourself. He didn't have an answer. There was nothing to engineer his way out of. He looked at me like he was seeing, for the first time in years, the thing he'd spent so long not seeing, the truth of the work he'd once loved and long since sold, told back to him by the kid who'd worshipped him, in the form of his sponsor's flagship seized on the track. And I think some cold part of him understood that he hadn't lost control of me at that final. He'd been losing it from the day he first decided the money mattered more than the truth, and the seize on lap 3 was just the truth finally catching up with him in public. He left without another word. I never made my machine lie for him again. And that, more than the title, more than the seize, was the moment Maddox truly broke, not in the pit, where it was public, but quietly, where the man who'd sold the truth had to watch it win without him. I won the title. I want you to sit in those words, because in my first life they were the great unbearable if I carried into a cynical rotted life and a death by a machine that seized, if only I'd run it true, and in my second they were simply what I did. I won the championship, the underdog engineer, whose honest machine beat the bought showpiece clean on the track where it couldn't be bought back, and with it came the proof and the career and, far more than those, the thing I'd actually lost, the faith. Because the one thing that had ever stood between me and a life of building true things was a hero who taught me the truth doesn't win, and the moment I proved on the track that it does, the faith I'd had no other way to recover came roaring back, because the work had been honest all along. The years after were the years I should have had, and I want to tell you about the two things that meant the most, because there were two losses, and the second life recovered both. The first was the gift. I became the engineer I was born to be. Of course I did. The only thing that had ever stood between me and a life of building true machines was a man who taught me integrity was a children's story, and the moment I proved him wrong on the track, my hands were simply mine again, building honest things the way I had as a girl. I built machines that mattered, not just racing robots but real ones, machines that did hard, true work in the real world, machines built with the integrity I'd nearly let die, and I won't tell you the sport or the industry was clean because it wasn't. The money still pushed and the showpieces still got funded, but I built true and I made the true ones when often enough to prove it could be done, and that was a life. But the second loss was the deeper one, and recovering it was the real second life. Because the worst thing Maddox did wasn't tanking my career, it was taking my faith, teaching a young idealist that integrity is a fool's game, that the truth doesn't win, that believing in the honesty of the work just marks you as a child, and that acid had eaten more of me than any closed door ever could. And the second life gave the faith back, and then asked me to be worthy of it. Because here is the thing I understood, standing over a machine that ran true while the bought one seized, that the faith was never about Maddox. I'd made a mistake worshipping a man, when what I actually loved was the work, the honest machine, the truth that comes out under strain, and the work had never betrayed me. Only the man had. The work was exactly as honest as I'd always believed. I'd just put my worship on a person instead of on the thing itself, and people, Even great ones sell out, but a machine never lies. And once I understood that, I stopped needing a hero because I could be the thing instead. I could be the engineer of integrity I'd needed Maddox to be, for real this time, and let the young idealists put their faith in the work and not in me, and never, ever teach one of them that the truth doesn't win. And there was one more thing, the quietest. I never forgot what it is to be the young idealist who worships a hero and gets taught that integrity is a children's story. So I became the genuine article, the engineer who builds true and tells the young ones the truth. Gus told me that a machine tells the truth when you push it, and the race doesn't care whose sponsor you are, and you must never, ever make a true thing lie to save a coward his paycheck. I mentored the idealists, the ones still in love with the honest work, and I protected their faith instead of selling it, because some of what I came back for was them, the next kid who'd give her soul to the integrity of the work, who'd never be told by someone she worshipped to make her own truth lie. I saw Maddox one last time, years later, and it's the truest measure of how far the two roads had run apart. I was an established engineer by then, a builder of true things, back at some gathering of the sport that could no longer quite hold itself without acknowledging me, and Maddox was old, diminished, a faded former legend whose great name had become, in the end, most famous in the small circles that knew for the underdog he'd told to tank, and whose sponsor Corvex had long since moved its money on, the way the money always does, leaving him with neither the integrity he'd sold nor the funding he'd sold it for. He saw me, saw the engineer I'd become, the true machines, the standing, the unmistakable fact that the worshipper he'd tried to corrupt had built a whole honest life he could never have a piece of, and the old complicated recognition crossed his face. He came over. He said my name, just my name, Romy, the way they always do at the end. And I waited to feel the old thing, the worship, the ache for the hero's approval, the desperate need for the man I'd built my soul on to be right after all. And it wasn't there. Where it had been was a clean, quiet space, because the worship had finally, fully died, not in bitterness, but in completion, the way a hunger ends when you found the real thing it was hungry for, which in my case was never a man at all, but the honest work, and I'd had that in my hands for years now. There was a whole true life out there with my name on it, machines I hadn't built yet, idealists I hadn't protected yet, and the faith running clean through all of it. And I was so completely full of the real thing that there was nothing left in me to want from the man who'd once been my idea of it.
He tried to talk.
He said something about how I'd always been the most gifted he'd ever seen, how the sport was a hard business, how a man has to keep his sponsors happy, how I'd understand someday the position he'd been in. It was the closest Maddox could come to an apology, and it still managed to be the sellout's same old sermon. And I noticed, listening, that I didn't need it. Not the apology, not the admission, not anymore anything he had to give, because he'd never actually held the thing I loved. He'd only ever pointed at it before he let it go. In my first life, I'd have given anything for this man to be the hero I'd built my soul on, to have been right, to have kept the faith. I'd have followed him off any cliff. But I'd found the real thing years before, the day my true machine ran clean while his bought one seized, and I'd been living in it ever since. I didn't need Maddox to be my hero. I'd become the thing he only pretended to be. So I let him finish, and I didn't argue, and I didn't accept it either. I just let it land in the air between us and dissolve. I had a real teacher once, I said, and let the pause sit before I finished, an old machinist named Gus. He taught me that a machine tells the truth when you push it, and that you never make a true thing lie to save a coward his paycheck. You taught me to love the work, Elias. I just had to find someone who hadn't sold it to learn how to keep it. And I gave him a small, distant, final nod. Not the worshipping look of the girl who'd built her soul on him. That girl was at rest now, her faith recovered, gone with the cynical rotted life and the seized machine of a death that no longer counts. And then I went back to my own life, my own true machines, my own idealists whose faith I'd never sell, and I left Maddox holding the memory of an engineer he'd told to tank, who had instead run hers true and made his showpiece seize in front of the world. I think about that office sometimes. The warm voice, the hand on my shoulder, the line, "Tank the robotics final so my sponsor's team wins, do it for all our jobs. This is how the real world works." and how in one life I obeyed and made my own true machine lie and let my faith rot and died running junk that seized, and in another life I refused and ran it at the limit and let the race tell the truth. The whole divergence of two lives, the difference between an engineer dying with her faith dead and an engineer who built true things to the end, came down to a single word, in a pit.
No.
The smallest word, and the truest thing I ever ran. The one honest part one never once machined wrong. People think revenge has to be loud. I thought so too. In the dark after my first death, the confrontations, the exposures, the satisfying ruin. But the most complete revenge I ever took was to run my own machine true while the man who told me to tank it discovered, on lap 3, what his sponsor's showpiece was worth without a better machine being told to lie. I never raised my voice except to say no. I never did a thing to Kane's machine. I just ran mine at the limit and made his get pushed and let the race tell the truth. And it turned out the whole thing, Kane's record, Maddox's legend, Corvex's flagship, all of it, had only ever been standing on my willingness to make my own truth lie, and the one time I refused, the truth came out, and the truth was a seize on lap 3. I've thought a great deal, across 2 lives, about the particular thing Maddox did to me, because it's the most dangerous version of the ask in this whole family of asks, and almost no one names what makes it so deadly. The others take something from you, your title, your future, your work. Maddox took my faith, and he did it with the oldest and most respectable lie there is, the lie that calls cowardice, maturity, and surrender the real world. This is just how the world works. The title doesn't matter as much as the funding. Grow up. It is the sentence that has talked more good people out of more integrity than any threat ever could, because it doesn't ask you to believe you're doing wrong. It asks you to believe you're finally being wise, that the part of you that wanted to do the honest thing was just naive, a child's notion you're better off without. And the reason it works, the reason it worked on me, is that it usually comes from someone you respect, someone who seems to have survived and succeeded by following it, so that their cynicism looks like proof and your idealism looks like inexperience. And here is the thing it took me dying to understand. The thing I'd tell every idealist whose hero has just asked her to sell the truth. It is not maturity. It is just a person who sold their own integrity so long ago they need you to sell yours too, because every honest person who refuses is a standing rebuke to the deal they made. The cynic who's seen through everything hasn't seen more than you. He's seen less, because he stopped looking at the one thing that was always true, that the work is honest even when people aren't, that a machine tells the truth even when its maker lies, that integrity isn't a children's story. It's just a thing the disappointed talk themselves out of, so they don't have to feel the weight of what they gave up. So no, I don't feel a flicker of guilt that the flagship seized on lap 3. I did nothing to it. I just stopped strangling the truth to flatter a coward's deal and let an honest machine, pushed hard, do the only thing an honest machine ever does, which is tell the truth. Refusing to make a true thing lie is not naivety, and it is not throwing away your future. It only looks that way to the ones who already threw away theirs and need company in the dark. The people who ask you to make a true thing lie and call it the real world are almost always the ones who needed it to. I made my own true machine lie once, for a hero who'd sold his soul, and I died with my faith dead and a machine seizing on me. I won't make a true thing lie again. Not in this life, and if there's another after it, not in that one either. I'm running my own machines true most days now, building honest things in a life that has the faith back in it, my hands quick and the work clean the way it was when I was a girl in love with the integrity of a machine. And every time I push a true thing to its limit and watch it hold together exactly as I built it to, I think about the engineer who made her own truth lie for a hero who'd sold his, who let her faith rot and died running junk that seized, and I'm so grateful she got the chance to do it differently. Because that engineer in the pit didn't just win back a title. She won back the faith, the honest machine, the truth that comes out under strain, the integrity of the work she'd given her soul to and nearly let die, and the simple, total, hard-won fact of being an engineer who runs her machine true and lets the race tell the truth, instead of one who strangles her own honest work so a bought showpiece never has to be pushed. And she never, ever, made a true thing lie again. I died the first time with my own true machine made to lie, my faith dead, killed by a neglected machine that seized because no one cared for it. I intend to die the second time an old woman who ran every machine she ever built true, with a life of honest work behind her and a generation of idealists whose faith I kept. And if a machine comes for me again at the end, some last failure I can't pull clear of, let it find me having built true and run true, and never once made an honest thing lie. All the way down. Same machine, both ends of two lives. The first time it was the phantom of everything I betrayed, a true thing I forced to lie at a fallen hero's word, and then a junk machine that seized and killed me. This time it's the real thing, everything I kept, the machine run true at the limit and the race telling the truth and the faith proven, mine in the open for good. And the only thing that ever stood between the two was a single word, in a pit, said level and unafraid to the man I'd worshipped my whole life, who told me to tank. No.